and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start off with the sad news that Patricia Nell Warren, who wrote the best-selling Front Runner in 1974, has died.
Seminal. We'll talk a little about her and her career. She actually had a quite fascinating life.
She was a rebel.
Also having a fascinating life, President Trump. He celebrated the abolition of civil rights.
That's a quote.
At the National Prayer Breakfast. And we'll tell you more about that.
The Republican-led Senate, on one day in the Judiciary Committee, confirmed 44 right-wing judicial nominees. Things are going to be different in this country.
This is what happens when we don't have control of the Senate and we have only a 51 vote rule, or majority vote rule. And there was a setback in a federal court for the cause of treating anti-transgender discrimination as sex discrimination.
A New York City Council member said that the gay community controls the city council.
I should hope so.
And he has set off a firestorm.
There are a lot of angles to that. The Episcopal Diocese of the state of Maine has elected an out gay bishop.
A lesbian teacher in Virginia was persecuted for not being feminine enough, and a lesbian 11-year-old in New Mexico was both bullied and supported in her coming out.
And a very shocking story that's not shocking to those who know about it, but it's shocking that it's public finally. A famous journalist opens up about being groped by New York's Catholic Cardinal Spellman in 1967.
And we want to alert our free speech viewers that they are going to be in pledge mode from February 21st to March 17th. And during that time, Gay USA will premiere on Fridays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and repeat on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern. The regular schedule will resume March 18th. Got all that down?
If you are signed up to receive our once-a-week email, you'll get those details in that. If you're not signed up, perhaps you would like to go to gayusatv.org and simply sign up to receive the
right
newsletter.
Right there on the homepage.
Just once a week, and we'll tell you what's coming up on the show that week and information like this and some extra links and stuff.
So Patricia Nell Warren, most of you know her as the author of The Front Runner, which was the first sort of gay commercial novel to be a bestseller.
First to hit the New York Times bestseller list.
Yes, and this is 1974, and I was coming out, but I wasn't an activist yet. And that book, and of course you see the testimonies of people from around the world about how reading this book changed their lives because it was a love story, and we were, it just transformed people. It was about a coach and an Olympic athlete having this relationship, and I remember giving it to my mother because when I came out, I gave her The Front Runner. I got to give her something to help her along, and she said, "Why didn't you tell me about that book? I was under the hairdryer and I couldn't stop crying." Oh my God, she was just overwhelmed.
I thought you were going to say, she said to you, "But you're not a runner, Andy."
No, but it had such an impact on people.
Yes, it really did.
But there's a lot more about her.
Well, she was a runner. She was a distance runner, and that's in part how she thought of writing this book in the first place. She was an activist for a long time. She worked at Random House as copy editor, I think, for
Reader's Digest.
I'm sorry, it wasn't. You're right. It's Reader's Digest, not Random House. Thank you.
Well,
for
she might have
almost
done that too.
20 years.
Yeah.
No, it was Reader's Digest.
Yeah.
She had.
Well, as a runner, she was one of the women who busted into the Boston Marathon.
Yes, in where do I have
1969.
Thank you. I really should. And so the book was such a big phenomenon when it was published that Paul Newman talked about making it into a movie, and there were other attempts to make it into a movie over the years, and there was a recent movie called The Front Runner, which had nothing to do with this.
About Gary Hart.
But they are still attempting to make a movie of this book. I have no idea why it's taken so long. It's ridiculous. There have certainly been plenty of gay movies made, but there is some thought that now they will be able to make it into a movie.
It's a great story. Look how long it took to make the film of The Normal Heart. And HBO finally did it.
Well, a lot less time than has elapsed since the publication of The Front Runner.
Now, she was also part of a class action lawsuit against Reader's Digest for discrimination against women. She volunteered as a teacher at the West Hollywood Eagle Center School for LGBT youth. She was very involved in. She was from Montana, lived in New York for a long time, then she was Southern California.
She wrote a monthly column for A&U, the AIDS magazine, for many years, and brought a lot of attention to the epidemic by doing that.
And she wrote a bunch of other novels, and
including some women's stories too.
But Karen Ockham, the lesbian journalist, said she literally saved thousands of lives by allowing gay people to see they could live and love without shame.
Really, and the impression I got from reading all the statements about her, because I didn't know her, West Coast, East Coast, was that she was completely down to earth and approachable, that she was involved on a daily basis in all of these activities, and she had a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances in the community. People, one after the other, talked about their relationship with her, and she wasn't some distant, isolated person. She was definitely in there and active.
She was not part of the literary elite and liked it that way.
Yeah.
All right. We move to...
our president.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So he goes to the National Prayer Breakfast, and he literally praises the abolition of civil rights. Now, of course, I imagine he was supposed to be speaking about the abolition of slavery, but he can't keep those things straight.
He was misspeaking about the civil rights movement.
Because Satan is on his shoulder all the time.
He was bragging about how much he had increased religious freedom.
Now, the National Prayer Breakfast has been going on for a long time. Obama used to go. Speaker Pelosi was at this one, and Bishop Curry, who did the wedding of
Obama used
Harry
to go
and
to
Meghan.
this.
Yeah. So...
it's all a put-up job, by the way, by the very right-wing evangelical group.
Obama was lectured by Ben Carson at the National Prayer Breakfast once.
Yes, but it's that House, that group that is heavily lobbying on these issues who throws this, and they all show up.
Trump also thanked Karen Pence for taking on a job at a Christian school. And he also bragged how he is letting adoption agencies discriminate on the basis of religious faith. It's nothing to be proud of when you take an oath to defend the Constitution.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is in praise of his Health and Human Services Department giving South Carolina a waiver so that their publicly funded religious adoption agencies can discriminate against people of any other faith, let alone LGBT.
And if you would like a waiver, just write to Donald Trump, the White House, Washington, D.C., and you'll get one.
You will, for whatever it is you want a waiver
and you're
for.
Of course, I'm thinking ahead to a story I was going to talk about in international news, but the Netherlands did a survey and found that the kids of gay parents graduate at a 7% higher rate than the kids so you're depriving these. I know there's some subtleties there, have to do with income and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But could be worse.
Certainly no study has found that kids of same-sex parents do worse. They either do the same or better.
Right.
So Attorney General Whitaker was testifying last week at his confirmation hearing to the Senate. And he said very firmly that he does not believe that Title VII covers sexual orientation or gender identity. And he threw it right back at the senators. He said, if you want that, change the law. And I thought, well, I'd like to interpret Title VII's sex discrimination, non-discrimination as covering us, but he's also correct that they ought to be they should be passing the Equality Act. They should be doing more to make that happen.
Acting Attorney General Whitaker, is he still, or do they already confirm?
Well, on Friday
William
he
Barr
was saying 6 more days, so by the time you see this, it'll probably be former.
Whitaker didn't know if he had any trans staff, but said he would have no problem with them.
I missed that part.
Now, of course, Trump had a rally this week in El Paso, and he got 6,500 people, and Beto O'Rourke got 15,000. That's encouraging.
And Trump lied about the numbers, too.
But Trump is winning on one big front, and that's on the judiciary. Last Thursday, the Republican-led Senate Judiciary Committee advanced 44 right-wing nominees, most of whom have demonstrated hostility to lesbian and gay rights, civil rights.
Vociferously.
Now, this means, with all these judges on these courts, that even when if we may regain power, the White House, Congress, in 2020, these judges will be sitting there, and the laws that we pass can be overruled by the courts.
More about that later. Migrant children, it turns out, the ones who've been separated from their families, are being processed for foster parenting or foster houses or guardians, whatever they call them, through a Christian adoption agency affiliated with Betsy DeVos.
Oh, my God.
So you can imagine the process for assigning these kids to homes where, of course, they're never heard from again. There's no attempt to reunite them with their parents. No one is tracking them. No one is keeping count of numbers or where anybody is or where the parents are. No one is making. This is Christianity. This is what these agencies are doing.
No, as one of the congresswomen said last week, no, this is child abuse. This is kidnapping, she said.
Yes.
Now, ICE is holding more than 100 trans people in detention facilities.
111 at last count.
20 facilities, 45 in Texas alone, and that's the place where Roxana Hernandez, a trans woman, died.
And HHS, Health and Human Services, which has, along with the Department of Homeland Security, has responsibility for people in detention, when asked about reunification of the kids with their parents, said it would be too difficult.
Yeah, somebody suggested, why don't you put, like they do in hospitals, put bands around their hands so that you can track them.
Insert a tracking device.
That would be too much trouble.
And back to our favorite subject of the trans people serving in the military, which, the ban on that is making progress. Senators Gillibrand, Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, and Senator Reed have introduced a bill to protect trans troops serving in the military.
And somebody's running. I think
Jack Reed of Rhode Island?
Yes. Somebody I think it was Gavin Newsom in California, said we're not going to discriminate in the National Guard.
Yes. Yes.
But he's the governor now.
All right.
He likes us. He married us before we were allowed to.
Presidential candidates. Pete Buttigieg was asked about whether he could stand up to Trump in debates. That's what the Democrats are all being asked. Can you really take him on? Because he's a killer in debates.
This is my favorite quote of the week.
You may do it.
No, go ahead.
No.
Well, he said, I'm a gay man from Indiana. I know how to stand up to a bully. That was great. That's a great way to put it.
It strikes at so many things. But we have a little political problem here in New York with a member of the New York City Council, the Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr., a Pentecostal minister from the Bronx who served for a long time in the state Senate and is now in the City Council. That's him in the white cowboy hat.
With Brian Brown of the National Organization for Marriage.
Arm in arm.
They were marching against same-sex marriage when it passed in New York.
They have done many demonstrations together, and Reverend Diaz has been on the anti-LGBT bandwagon for many, many years and said many offensive things, going back to 1994 when he was railing against the gay games coming to New York on the grounds that it would, A, teach children that homosexuality was okay, and all the gay men at the gay games would be spreading HIV to the population.
So, he said this week that the city council he said it in Spanish, it takes a little while to get the translations going on these things, was controlled by the homosexual community. And then he was called out on it. He wouldn't apologize. He was condemned. A lot of the mayor, the governor, they criticized him and said he should apologize. Others, a lot of people saying he should resign. Can't make him resign. But they did take away his subcommittee.
They did.
This morning.
I knew it was today. Yes, thank you.
And so he was on a subcommittee about for-hire vehicles. So they just folded that into the transportation committee. And now he's got nothing.
Well, when he came onto the council a couple of years ago, everyone knew what a bigot he was, and no one wanted to give him any real power. So they created this subcommittee out of whole cloth to give him a title.
He wasn't doing such a bad job with it, by the way. I mean,
well, that's the question.
He is a horrible homophobic bigot, and he has hurt us enormously. And he whips up hatred against us. Even his own son, who was the borough president of the Bronx and has the same name, Ruben Diaz, criticized and called on his father to apologize. But Diaz Sr. said, what's homophobic about saying the gay community controls the city council? I'm giving them credit for the power and influence that they have. Substitute the word Jews in that, and I think, as some people have suggested, and you will understand how bigoted it is.
Now, an out lesbian city councilor in North Carolina, in Durham, is also under attack for the opposite reasons, for being a lesbian. A Catholic school in Durham, North Carolina, was holding a Black History Month event, and they invited some local prominent people in to speak about Black History Month. And Vernetta Alston was one of them. She is a member of the city council.
She's a graduate of the school.
Yes, that's true. She is an alumna of the school. But they canceled her speech and disinvited her because she is a lesbian, and they didn't want her speaking at this Catholic school.
So she said the church was condemning the lives and rights of the LGBT community and called it a sad, regressive, and life-altering message that you're sending.
It is.
To the kids. It's awful.
Very sad. And
I'm not clear who was protesting.
Like parents or school leaders
or what?
What's
happening on all these issues? There is a right-wing group online that goes after any of these kind of appearances and just starts hounding people about not allowing any hint of homosexuality.
That's quite a gig. They probably raise a lot of money doing that, and then all they have to do is go online and complain about people, and they get paid. Well, in West Virginia, another one, a Republican, Eric Porterfield, member of the House of Delegates.
There he is.
He has courted controversy by saying that LGBTQ people are the modern-day KKK, lacking only the hoods.
And then he was asked, well, what would you do if your son was gay or your daughter was gay? He said, I'd do this, and then I'd throw them in and see if they could swim. It was basically, go ahead and drown, as far as I'm concerned.
That's a reference to witches, too, in the Salem witch trials, because one of the things they did was see whether if you could swim, you were a witch. If you couldn't, you were dead.
It sounds like whatever.
Not good.
All right. Well, he said he was defending people with religious convictions who don't want to run their businesses the way a socialist left agenda wants to run it. You're going to hear more about this socialism stuff, which is...
Oh, my God. It's just... I am hoping that Trump is so over the top about that no one will pay attention to it. But, of course, some people will. Well, and then we have the Wyoming state senator, Lynn Hutchings, who said to there were a group of students from a high school gay straight alliance or GLBT support alliance or whatever they're calling it these days. So they were at the state capitol lobbying for a non-discrimination bill. And this state senator says to them, well, what if I had sex with all the men in the Capitol, and then I had sex with all the women in the Capitol, and then I had sex with all their kids, and then I had sex with all their dogs? Should my sexual orientation be protected?
Your
Lynn?
orientation would be protected. Your activity, not necessarily.
Yes, that is the important distinction.
Well, I've been trying to make that point for about 50 years now.
Yeah.
And people don't seem to understand it.
No.
Are we staying in some of those?
Well, I have one other political story from Puerto Rico. This is good news.
Yes.
Good news. The governor of Puerto Rico has sent a memo to state employees laying out guidelines. He says, be nice to trans people coming in to change their gender marker on their driver's license. Be nice to same-sex couples coming in for a marriage license.
Be nice to single people too, by the way.
Yes, and they're having trainings and education, and the guidelines are laid out. They're making a proactive attempt to deal with any instances of discrimination.
This didn't just happen because the gender marker thing was from a case that Lambda Legal had to bring that was settled in July.
He's not changing any laws.
No, I know, but I'm just saying the law did change,
Yes.
and then you had to deal with it.
Then you have to set, when people then want to take advantage of the changes in the law, if the state employees are not getting with the program, you have to issue something like this and conduct trainings to teach people.
Well, let's talk about some people who are being mistreated. In Virginia, where are we on the list? Are we okay here? No,
we have one other piece of good news first from Maine.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Put his picture up there.
Out gay Episcopal minister Reverend Thomas James Brown, 48 years old, has been elected as the first out gay Episcopal bishop of Maine.
Yes, okay, because we had we had Gina
of Maine.
Yes. Now
the Episcopal Church is not the most liberal church, and no. They've been slow on some stuff. They're way ahead of a lot of others.
He said, "I wasn't expecting to be elected." He's got a spouse of 20 years who's also an Episcopal priest, but he has to be confirmed by the other dioceses, and he will be consecrated in June. There were 27 people up for the job.
Yes, and he got it.
Yeah.
Now we can get to the bad news.
Well, South Dakota, they killed some anti-trans bills, but they passed one in the House this week. It prohibits educators from including gender identity or gender expression in their curricula K through 7. So a setback there.
In Las Cruces, New Mexico, the sad story, sad with a maybe happy ending, of an 11-year-old lesbian. She came out to her mother.
Everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody, you're right. After 6th grade, 5th grade.
Her name is
She's now in 6th grade.
Savannah Tirre, T-I-R-R-E.
Yes.
Okay.
So she came out and she was severely bullied at school. There's a little video circulating, about 10 seconds worth, of someone beating her up outdoors.
Well, she got threats online, and then somebody sent out a text saying, this little lesbian is going to get jumped. So get your phones out, in other words, so that you could, photograph it. Her mom says she's also gotten lots of support, and we have pictures of the kids supporting her.
Yes, which is lovely.
But this...
And she's being protected now, but the poor thing, she's 11 years old.
She's already had seizures over this because they won't leave her alone. I mean, look, coming out when you're 11 is, quite a challenge. But it's happening more and more, and schools have to deal with it. And then in Virginia, there's a teacher named...
Dina Persico.
This is in Chesterfield County, and she says that administrators, she's been teaching for about 10 years, told her she was too masculine and needed to be more feminine. So she was harassed. She was barred from using the women's room at the school.
She's a teacher.
We can't have you going into the women's room with those young girls.
She had a small stroke over this. She is now suing the Chesterfield County Public Schools for their discriminatory treatment of her.
She's married to another teacher, and the harassment began when they learned that she was gay and that she was married. And that's kind of what happens. I understand when that happens in Catholic schools, they really go nuts. But this is a public school. And she was told, oddly, that she was too flamboyant. Usually that's just used for the guys, and intimidating. So she's suing.
In Iowa, a district court has ruled that the University of Iowa cannot penalize a school club, the Business Leaders in Christ Club, because they said we can have gay members, but no gay people can hold leadership positions in our club.
But what the court said in this case, and I don't know that I can disagree, if you have other clubs that are allowed to exclude on other protected bases, that you can have a club for African American students or whatever, that then you can't, they're saying the policy was being applied unequally. I thought all student groups had to welcome all comers, and apparently they don't. So if you're going to do it to some, you can't just do it, say, to this one, that you can't discriminate.
Well, their problem was that they announced this. If they just not voted for a gay person to a leadership position, they probably would have gotten away with it more. But in the end, they won because other clubs were allowed to exclude.
In Nashville, Mayor David Briley signed an executive order to help LGBT-owned businesses by helping them the way they help women-owned businesses, disabled-owned businesses, etc.
But they're also proposing a lot of bad bills in Tennessee, and one of them I think is really scary. It's a bill that would ban same-sex marriages on the grounds that the written Tennessee law refuses to acknowledge same-sex marriages, even though the Supreme Court has legalized them. So the plan is that they pass this law to ban same-sex marriages. Clearly, it will be taken to court and ruled inappropriate, illegal, whatever. But then the sponsors of this law expect to take it up to the Supreme Court, hoping for a decision from the newly really conservative court that puts back a states' rights system where each state can decide what marriages to legalize.
That would be overturning Obergefell.
Yes, it would. And that's what they're after.
Now, this bill has been around for a couple of years. The General Assembly estimated in 2017 it could cost $9 billion in lost federal funding because of the way people are treated in health care as a result of having such a law. But the people doing this think they've got the winning strategy of taking this up to the Supreme Court. And look, the right wing has just had a preliminary victory on transgender people serving in the military. Yes. And there is certainly no good reason to bar trans people from serving in the military. Every study has proved that. Their own service has proved it. And yet the Supreme Court is allowing the Trump administration temporarily to bar such service until a fuller case comes before them. But Justice Roberts, not a big fan, did hold the line on the Louisiana abortion law, and they did not uphold that.
For the moment.
And of course, Art Leonard is very concerned about the fact that the opponents of the New Jersey bill banning conversion therapy for minors is headed for the Supreme Court, and he says, based on the way they're arguing it, it doesn't bode well for us.
Yeah, I think there's scary times ahead.
And whether or not William Barr gets confirmed, Lambda Legal said he is singularly disqualified for the office. Mark Siegel from the Philadelphia Gay News made a point. We have got to start saying to Republican senators, if you vote for any, it's not just that if you make an anti-gay vote, if you vote for any of these nominees, then forget about us.
And he listed the Republican senators who are up for re-election next year who could be vulnerable to a challenge from a Democratic opponent. Right. And people like Susan Collins, and there are a few others. And we do have to get serious about that, and we do have to challenge those people in the meantime not to put these people on the courts and not wait till the election next year. But we definitely have to vote them out of office.
Cory Gardner in Colorado, certainly.
Yep.
We didn't do the gay angle to the Jeff Bezos story. The person apparently spilled the beans about him was the gay brother of his mistress.
Oh, I knew it was the brother. I didn't know he was gay.
And he's a Trump supporter.
Oh, yes, a gay Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the courts, in Texas, we had a bad decision from the Fifth Circuit. Now, we've had a mixture of decisions in the last few years from these federal courts about the sex discrimination laws and whether they include trans people and gay people. And lately we've been getting some good decisions about that, although we're very concerned about what the Supreme Court will ultimately say. But the Fifth Circuit, which is Texas and
Louisiana and Mississippi.
Thank you. Has decided in a Title VII gender identity discrimination case that Title VII does not include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes.
Then there were two religious cases the Supreme Court, not two that the Supreme Court decided, but you saw that they denied a Muslim inmate the right to an imam going to death row.
That was shocking.
So religious liberty, but only for Christians.
Yes.
On the other hand, at a lower federal court, a student said, I shouldn't be taught about Islam in my class because I'm a Christian. It was a history lesson, and the federal judge said, please, you're not being discriminated against. So they lost that case.
But big religion story coming up next week. Next weekend, February 22nd through 27th, I think, in St. Louis, the United Methodist Church will be having a general convention. And they are going to continue, and I hope end the debate they've been having for years about ordaining openly LGBTQ clergy, performing same-sex marriages, just generally affirming homosexuality or a variety of gender identities, because their codes, I've forgotten what they're
hierarchical church.
Yes, and they have very explicit condemnations of all these things. So there has been a movement within the Methodist Church for change, and they have several specific plans on the agenda that they're going to vote on next weekend. One is called the Simple Plan, one is called the Traditionalist Plan.
It is a gift to be simple. It is a gift to be wise. Is this the worldwide church?
It's certainly the United States.
Okay.
I don't know, but it's...
it is a worldwide church.
And the
big outfit in South Korea.
Oh, it's huge. But the question is whether they will allow for local autonomy on these issues.
Well, it would be nice if it'd be nicer to gay people, because hate crimes in Washington, D.C., for instance, were up 100% against LGBT people last year. Of course, it's a trend across the country in the Trump era.
Well, I think we should get to our favorite religion case, Cardinal Spellman.
Oh, okay. I couldn't believe this. Now, Lucian Truscott is a veteran journalist. He wrote a story about Stonewall at the time for the Village Voice. And he now wrote this story on Salon that says, when I was a West Point cadet, we were supposed to interview Cardinal Spellman at the Chancery in 1967. I'm a student journalist, essentially. I'm an adult, but I'm a student journalist. And when we got there, and he said there were 3 or 4 people in the room, every time I started asking questions, he started moving his hand up my thigh towards my crotch. And he wouldn't stop doing it. The Monsignor in the room doesn't name him. Kept moving the hand and saying, now, Your Eminence. Well, people are the Archdiocese is pretending to be surprised about this. We've never had a credible allegation against Cardinal Spellman. Are you kidding? I mean, I read a story in Fag Rag, a magazine called Fag Rag, Boston, years ago, that said he went to a party and he, can I say this on television? He filleted everybody in the room. They were all chorus boys. I'm not going to go into all the details of the story, but that's the kind of how sexually active he was.
I think you can say performed oral sex on them.
Right. It went on and on and on. Well, I mean, the rest of the story is, call me, I'll let you know the rest of the story. But
it's just wonderful. I saw we put up the picture of Cardinal Spellman. Did we put up the picture of Lucian Truscott and his West Point cadet there? That's now, one can understand the attraction,
Sure.
but moving your hand up his thigh continually while he's interviewing you.
It was the year of Spellman's death when he was 77 in 1960. He did die that year. But he was notorious. So when a guy named John Cooney was writing a New York Times book about Spellman's biography, about him, I was one of the sources for all the gay stories that I'd been told from people in Dignity. I was a gay Catholic at the time. I told him all these stories, and Monsignor Clark from the Archdiocese made a big fuss about it, and there was a story in the Times where Cooney had to pull back because none of the men that I'd spoken to would go on the record. They were old gay guys.
Secondhand.
They were old gay guys, and they just wouldn't publish it. So they just had to say there were rumors about his homosexuality. He was notorious. As Truscott says, his nickname was Mary.
Well, I'd say they should write that book now, but everybody's dead.
Well, Truscott did say, we tried to laugh it off at the time, but he says, I wish I had spoken out. Yes,
sure.
I wish you'd spoken out.
Well,
I mean, in recent, he said, not then, but now,
yes.
In recent years, because he said it might have prevented some of the abuse. This was such a high case of all the other things, yeah.
Well, I'd love to think so, but given the fact that the church even now is saying, oh, we never heard of this, I don't have great confidence. And that was
They're liars.
That was 2 years before Stonewall. This is...
But they're lying when they say they don't know that Spellman was notorious.
Of course.
Come on.
Okay, I'm not defending anybody.
Liars. Joe Zwilling, I'm naming you the spokesperson for the Archdiocese.
Oh my God. Well, speaking of old stories, in San Francisco, the police department is reopening a cold case from the 1970s of 5 gay men who were murdered. They've released a sketch of a possible murderer and an audio of him calling the cops and saying, I think you'll find a dead body, such and such. So if you think you might have any knowledge of this, check this out online with the cold case of the gay murders in San Francisco in the 70s.
We've told you about a rise in anti-gay, anti-LGBT violence in Austin. So they formed a Rainbow Patrol there in response, in the tradition of the Pink Panthers and other community patrols. So that's what they're trying to do to stop it. By the way, we were talking about legislation, and it was a nice statistic from last year that the bills to pass last year, 21 out of 210 pro-LGBT bills passed in state legislatures. 2 of 110 anti-LGBT bills passed.
We're hanging in there. But actually, I think one of the worst cases of violence against an LGBT person this last week was Dashir Moore.
Yes.
A young man who moved from Georgia to Colorado because he's trans and he thought he'd get better medical care in Colorado. Now, there he is with his dog. Pay attention to that dog, too. Dashir asked the company he was working for whether their insurance would cover his gender reassignment surgery, and they said yes.
No pre-clearance required.
All fine. He was having top surgery. And so he goes in, he has the surgery, and then they tell him, oh, you're not covered.
You owe us $30,000, the insurance company.
$30,000. Well, this...
Well, the doctors.
This, of course, left him distraught, horrified. In the meantime, the dog gets sick, and he's told the dog is going to require $6,000 for surgery. He can't pay it, and the dog died.
The ACLU is suing the employer for certifying this and then withdrawing it.
Terrible story.
In Washington, D.C., there's the trial of 2 men are underway who fatally shot Dee Dee Dodds, 22, a trans woman, in 2016. These guys were on a rampage against trans women in the District of Columbia. And in West Hollywood, a trans woman says she was assaulted by 5 gay men outside an LGBT bar. Alamo
do we know they were gay?
That's apparently what they.
I just thought it was 5 men who
in the story.
Okay, and boys in Memphis violently bullied a high school trans girl.
On the survey front, Parenthood, a new survey found that 77% of LGBT millennials are parents or are considering having children. That's a 44% increase over the older generation.
Oh, those young people.
48% plan to grow their families, as opposed to 55% of non-LGBTQ people.
Announcement, the first National Trans Visibility March, which had been scheduled for March 31st in D.C., has been postponed. It will be rescheduled probably in September, but they just weren't ready in the end. Too much to do, too much money to raise. They weren't ready to do it, so the weather will be better in September.
In Orlando, they've just released the results of an investigation into the Pulse massacre of 2016. They are saying no victims of the shooting were hit, wounded, or killed by friendly fire from the police, even though an incredible number of rounds were fired. There were, but they're clearing the officers of having, of course the officers when they're in the dark and anything could have happened, but that's what they are asserting at this point about the incident where 49 died and 50 people were injured at the Pulse.
And in Miami, we're now up to stupid human tricks. 2 gay men were arrested by Homeland Security, we have their mug shots, for attempting to bring drugs onto an Atlantis cruise, ketamine, K, GHB, other drugs. Now, ecstasy, these weren't huge amounts, but they were clearly the amounts were more than just for them. They were either going to sell them or give them away. I'm not sure which. But they talked about all this on a government computer.
Big mistake.
They got caught.
They did.
Yeah.
I like the fact that Ellen Page took on Chris Pratt for his membership in the notoriously anti-LGBT Hillsong Church.
Yes.
She said, look, being anti-LGBTQ is wrong. There aren't two sides. The damage caused is severe, full stop. Hillsong has a history of child molestation and ex-gay therapy as well.
And the membership of Justin Bieber, too.
Oh.
And I believe some of the Kardashians are also a member of Hillsong.
You worship a false god.
Yeah, I'm ready to move on to international news. How about you?
We can. Let's do that.
All right. In the Cayman Islands, the trial has opened of 2 lesbians and their daughter who are suing for marriage rights. They were married in the UK, I think, and the Cayman Islands are part of the Commonwealth. So but they're suing for marriage rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. So my question is, when the UK gets out of Brexit and gets out of the European Union, what's going to happen with these Commonwealth countries and their protection by the European Convention of Human Rights?
A horrible story out of Algeria, and we have a picture of him. A medical student, 21 years old, was murdered in his dorm room in Algiers. The walls were smeared with homophobic messages written in blood. This is Asil Balalta, 21. He had his throat slit. The LGBT group there in Algeria said there's a growing climate of homophobia in Algiers. The police say that they are investigating.
21. He posted on Facebook that he was bisexual. 21 years old, medical student, dead. Terrible story. In Japan, the town of Otsu will do a statistical analysis of school bullying. They've recorded 9,000 complaints over 6 years, and they're going to run this through a statistical analysis to try to establish patterns and reasons and methods and stuff. It'd be nice if they did something like that in this country, but of course most bullying doesn't get reported either.
Well, they also launched their first safe house in Japan to support displaced LGBT people, the homeless, in Tokyo. And that's a good
now,
sign.
they still haven't legalized same-sex marriage. They've got a long way to go, but these are interesting movements. On the bullying, they want to get past just dealing by anecdote. They want to take a more systematic approach.
Sure, you have to. You have to create an atmosphere for all kids, and it will help them all. All right.
In Honduras, they're having a huge fight in court over same-sex marriage. So here are a couple of lesbians outside the court kissing. These countries are really in a tizzy over the Inter-American Court mandating marriage all over Central and South America.
Almost as bad as the United States.
Almost. And in Brazil, President Bolsonaro, our new enemy, says that he's going to tell the schools they cannot teach anything about LGBT people. They cannot teach anything about violence against women. They cannot teach anything about feminism. And there will be military control of many of the schools.
In Cameroon, horrible story, a gay couple was spotted having sex in the shop of one of them. And a street kid shouted, "Homosexual, homosexual." And the locals rushed the place and started throwing rocks. The shopkeeper was killed. The kid was brought into the local chieftain and things, and they're trying to decide what to do with him. Awful.
In Botswana, on the other hand, the new president there gave a speech supporting LGBT rights after a trans woman was beaten by a mob last November. And the High Court there is hearing a challenge to the sodomy law, and a decision on that is expected in March.
So Tony Abbott, the right-wing former Prime Minister of Australia, who has a lesbian sister, was the leader of the fight against same-sex marriage. But now his district went 75% in the referendum for same-sex marriage. So now he's trying to say, I'm the one who proposed the referendum. That's how it passed. That's how it showed that people support it, and that's how it passed. I abstained on the vote. He's in danger of losing his seat, so he's trying to act like he is responsible for same-sex marriage in Australia. Well, I would say yes. Having an opponent as stupid and bigoted as you was a big help.
Well, his proposal of the referendum was an attempt to kill the movement for same-sex marriage. No gay people wanted the referendum because they thought it was too risky to put it to a vote of the people. But we won anyway because it was a brilliant campaign run by the same guy who helped legalize same-sex marriage in Ireland. He won it there.
Tiernan Brady?
Something like that, and then went to Australia and helped lead the winning campaign there. But for Tony Abbott, who campaigned against it, hugely, in spite of his lesbian sister, to now say he's responsible.
Let's go to Facebook.
Well, I was going to go across the pond there to New Zealand, where the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern showed up at the Big Gay Out, which is an anti-HIV event. She's been showing up there for years, but this is the first time she was able to go as the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
She's great.
She is great, and she was celebrating the government providing PrEP to everybody, lifting the cap on trans surgery. They used to have a numbers cap on how many they would finance, and she said they still need to get rid of conversion therapy. Imagine that speech from Donald Trump.
It's nice in Spain to see that the victims of Franco, remember him, Generalissimo Francisco Franco, the fascist leaders, still dead, but the LGBT victims of him are seeking compensation.
And now let's go to Facebook. In Italy,
let's put this picture up. This is in an art gallery in Italy.
It is art.
Right. It's got Jesus in a loincloth by Dolce & Gabbana, a leopard print loincloth.
By a gay artist.
And on the top, where it usually says, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, INRI, which should be JNRJ, but whatever, it says LGBT. So this was censored by Facebook. Now, any depiction of Jesus is of a half-naked man being tortured to death.
Yes.
What? So I don't understand how that's acceptable. And this is considered. But anybody can complain about it. I put it up on Facebook. Nobody complained. And whatever.
Interesting. So speaking of religion, in Israel, they have an ongoing fight about religious marriage ceremonies versus others, and only certain people are allowed to have religious marriage ceremonies and be actually officially married in Israel, and that does not include same-sex couples or people marrying outside the faith or any number of other things. So 2 Orthodox rabbis, in an attempt to forestall a more progressive movement that would let everybody get married, have proposed a scheme of civil unions for couples otherwise not allowed to marry legally, so that they could give some benefits and acknowledge the relationships, but they wouldn't achieve the highest rank.
Another country where the tail wags the dog.
All right, AIDS news?
Yeah, well, let's start, I guess, with President Trump and his AIDS plan. We have a picture there of his team to end HIV that was taken on February. Now, I don't know who else is in the room, but I'm looking at 6 white guys.
Well, there is a bigger picture that goes further down the table, and there is more of a mix of people, but this is clearly the head of the table, and this is clearly a picture of the guys in charge. And the idea that this is the crowd that's going to end the epidemic is not likely.
So HHS released their End AIDS in 2030 plan, and they say significant new resources are going to be put in after 2 years of cuts, of course, so it's only bringing us up to parity. They want to reduce diagnoses by 75% in 5 years, 90% in 10 years. The CDC is targeting 48 counties and 7 states, especially rural areas, but, we're still getting 40,000 new infections in the United States a year, and activists say these are empty gestures if you're not going to give the real resources and policies that are going to make this work.
Well, first of all, you have to destigmatize people vulnerable to HIV, and all Trump does all day long is stigmatize people vulnerable to HIV. Plus which, he's been robbing like the Ryan White Act money for other stuff, and I'm sure that some of this money is going to end up building the wall against Mexico.
Cutting Medicaid, cutting Medicare, all these things.
Look.
Cutting off drugs.
It is possible that the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who is otherwise collaborating in the separation of children at the border and shipping them off to religious adoption agencies, may have good intentions with this, but it's just impossible to believe that this is going to go anywhere.
But let's remind you of that figure, 75% they would like to reduce infections in 5 years. And let's look at the United Kingdom, what has done. Now, they pledged to end HIV transmission in 10 years, too. And they have this thing, but they have found that new infections have fallen 40% in recent years, surpassing the targets of 90% knowing their HIV status, 90% knowing they're HIV positive and accessing treatment, and 90% on treatment undetectable. The figures that they came up with on those fronts are 95%, 98%, and 97%.
That's amazing.
They're doing a terrific job.
Yeah, but they are pledging to do more money for prevention, more attention to targeted communities. And back here, the American College Health Association has recommended that college health services make a big push to offer PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, prevention medicine, Truvada, to their students on college campuses, which I think is a great idea.
One of the reasons they were so successful in Britain was because of Dr. Mags Portman, a hero to the LGBT and AIDS communities. She really pushed access to PrEP. She died of a rare cancer at the age of 44.
Mesothelioma, lung cancer.
She worked for a cutting-edge sexual health clinic. She was behind the PROUD study, proving PrEP's effectiveness so that it could get to patients, and set up a fund for poor people who couldn't get it because the NHS was dragging its rear on it. So, she was just a tremendous hero. And New York State, they've introduced the new Health Care Act that they say is better than anything in the country if it were to pass. Now, we'll see.
All right. Sorry about Dr. Portman. She died too young.
Much too young.
And also disappearing, as we move to more entertainment news, the Circus of Books in West Hollywood, run by a straight couple, the Masons, for decades.
Karen and Barry.
Yeah, and that is closing.
They're grandparents in their 70s now.
And now they sort of stumbled into being the big purveyors of LGBT books, gay porn, because they were amazed to find out how well it sold. So fine, we'll sell lots of it.
And it became a meeting place for people,
Yes.
a place for people to encounter each other in a place free of shame. They had to they were subjected to FBI raids. They spent some time. I think they had to serve a sentence at one point for this because somebody ordered it from Tennessee and they shipped it, and then they got prosecuted for that. But they lost a lot of staff to AIDS over the years, but they hung in there, and they were undone by Amazon, online porn, things like that.
Yeah. All right, well, the Grammys, this certainly was the year of the woman at the Grammys, and some very sexy lesbian and bisexual women really stole the show. Chief among them, Brandi Carlile. Now, Brandi Carlile is regarded as an Americana, kind of folky, bluegrass performer. And she had the most nominations. She had 6 Grammy nominations this year. And I was frankly ignorant, because I'm still listening to Motown from the 60s. But a viewer complained to me that when we talked about the Grammy nominations, I hadn't mentioned Brandi Carlile. And so I came on the next week and mentioned her and pointed her out as an out lesbian, married, having the most nominations. But I still, I wasn't really familiar with her music. Well, they finally, 3 hours into the telecast, she comes out to perform, and she brought down the house. She was amazing. She has the strongest voice. She reminds me a little of Katie Lang in the strength of her voice. She is a powerhouse, and people just lost their minds. They were so impressed. The New York Times said it was the best thing at the Grammys. It was stunning. It was so good, completely unexpected, and the song she sang, which is called "The Joke," is about bullying. You could look it up online. We'd show it to you, but our show always gets taken down off YouTube if we show music videos. So go to YouTube and look up "The Joke" by Brandi Carlile, Carlile. And of course, the other greats were out bisexual or pansexual Janelle Monáe, who just couldn't be better. She's so cool. And the sexiest performance of the whole evening was 2 women, St. Vincent and Dua Lipa, who did this St. Vincent song called "Mass Seduction," and they were just basically almost crawling all over each other, but it was so good and so sexy, and I just loved it.
Our friend Gus Kenworthy is going straight for pay. He is going to play Emma Roberts' boyfriend on American Horror Story in season 9.
If you would like to see the gay opera Billy Budd, it is done by the Norwegian Opera Company. It's a Benjamin Britten opera. It's done in English with English subtitles, a male cast, although a female director. That's available on Opera Vision for you to find.
Billy was gay? We had a first on the Disney Channel. A character said, "I'm gay," for the first time in the history of the channel. Chris Goodman, we had a picture of him there.
Cyrus Goodman.
Cyrus Goodman is the character on the Andy Mack show, played by Jordan Rush. The
and it's kind of cute. I saw the clip.
Yeah.
He's
funny,
talking to
I
his
know.
little girlfriends, and he's saying he has a crush on someone, and he doesn't intend to say anything, and then he sees the guy and he just blurts out, "I'm gay."
Right. Broadway Backwards is March 11th, we told you, but now it's going to be hosted by Jen Colella from Come From Away. She's hosting performances by Gavin Creel, Len Cariou, Donna McKechnie, Bebe Neuwirth. Go to BroadwayCares.org to find out more about Broadway Backwards, where the men sing the women's songs and the women sing the men's songs.
Jen describes herself as mostly gay and polyamorous.
Good.
Yeah, so that's...
And I'm going to miss Albert Finney at the age of 82. Among his great roles was Alfred Byrne, a gay man in A Man of No Importance, but you were not a man of no importance, Albert Finney.
And the dresser was pretty cool.
Tom Courtney played the gay guy who was the assistant. He was the obstreperous sir in that show. Yes, that had a gay theme, sub-theme, yes.
All right, so go to gayusatv.org to get on our mailing list. We'll tell you about the Free Speech Pledge Week, and we will see you next week.